Hi, I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, look, there are so many reasons why Squid Game became a phenomenon. We're of course talking about the Korean series about a deadly underground tournament where desperate people put their own lives up as ante to entertain the masked elite. So the third and final season just dropped on Netflix. Michelle Cho and Nicholas Quah are here to tell us whether it's still a hit. Hi, y'all.
How's it
Hey.
going?
Thanks for being here. And look, we just a warning. We are gonna get into spoilers in this chat. And to that end, Michelle, I'm gonna start with you. Look, a lot of people have talked about Squid Game as this sort of anti-capitalist screed within this entertainment show format. And look, like I mean, that's built into the story about the main character being Gi-hun, sorry. And he's the guy who wins Squid Game in the first season, basically gets rich at the expense of hundreds of lives. In the second season, he mounts this failed revolt against the whole Squid Game enterprise. Talk to me about like where he's at in season 3 and how his journey is feeding or is serving this anti-capitalist criticism.
Yeah. So we start off season 3, which is kind of a continuation, I would say, of the storyline of season 2, with Ki-hoon in a pretty dark place. I mean, basically, he is at this point of utter disillusionment. Like if season 1 was all about him becoming aware of the fact that capitalism promises ethically uncomplicated wealth, but really there's no such thing. At end of season 2, he's kind of also become disillusioned with a solution, which would be revolutionary struggle or, an attempt to, as they say, in Marxist criticism, seize the means of production. So that's not also the answer. And I think that, the show has tried to complicate that easy binary from the get-go especially by placing North Koreans both inside and outside the game. But so, yeah, Ki-hoon has gone from this state of kind of blissful ignorance, I can get wealthy with a windfall of lots of money, to this disillusioned despair. And, he knows now that like capitalist inequity is cruel yet inescapable, because it's set up to make us believe in fairness and equity, but really it's this like predatory social Darwinist system that makes solidarity impossible. And that's where he leaves us, which is I mean, we also may be sharing some of those sentiments, but season 3 tries to get us out of there. So it starts us off where Gi-hoon is and then tries to move us into something else.
Oh my God, I love how much you just packed into there from Marxism to social Darwinism. And it's like, what a journey. Look, Nicholas, like the first season, of course, I mean, as I mentioned, was this huge phenomenon, right? But I think the responses to season 2 and 3 have been more muted. Why do you think Squid Game it's not hitting as hard as it used to?
Yeah, it's a really good question, but you gotta kind of go and sort of unpack the reasons why we think that the first season was a phenomenon in the first place, and it's some combination of that anti-capitalist critique, but there's a lot of sort of K-drama shows that are capitalist critiques. One of my favorites is called Itaewon Class, and there's also like a lot of Western or American television shows that also do the same thing. I really do think it was the blending of the sheer surreal violence that married imagery of like childhood games with the sheer like cruelty and the visceral nature of how many of these characters, which are more like archetypes, get introduced to you and killed. And there's a mimetic quality to how it looks, right? The sort of pink jumpsuits, the shape symbols that the mask guards wear. And so I think it was the novelty of it ultimately that produced a really interesting moment. And I think the reason that seasons 2 and now 3 isn't hitting as hard or simply don't hit as hard with 2 reasons. One, it doesn't really advance or do anything that kind of produces a new novel feeling. It is very much a rote. We're returning to the formula, the rhythm, the structure, the vibe of the first experience. But ultimately, I think also, I mean, we're going to talk about spoilers ultimately, but like where the show ultimately lands in how it wants to grapple by continuing on the story, how it solves quote unquote the problem or does not solve the problem of capitalism, is deeply and profoundly unsatisfying, even though it might be insightful in however way you might view it. I think ultimately, it's those two things put together. It's just kind of a tough hang.
Okay, so deeply and profoundly unsatisfying is what Nicholas just said. Michelle, I mean, are you agreeing with Nicholas, or do you think that maybe this new season adds some new layers to the satire of the last season?
So I definitely think that okay, I overthink things for a living. So I'll put that out there.
We all do.
Okay.
We all do. That's why
So,
we're here on the
um,
radio.
so I think I totally agree with what Nick just said, that there's this kind of sensory level that the show operates on. And season one was sensational in every way possible. It was a very kind of kinetic show, and the plot moves relentlessly because it's this game structure. You're almost like advancing in levels, and so it's really hard not to binge. And then it was this like genuine global media event, right? It was sensational in that regard because of its novelty. Seasons 2 and 3, again, they're kind of complicating this critique by making it more multi kind of directional, and that is going to inevitably make it less propulsive and less linear, and probably more confusing. And so I think that that's what happens with seasons 2 and 3. But so if we're differentiating between this level of like how thought-provoking and kind of philosophically interesting is the show versus how satisfying is it as this kind of linear like propulsive narrative forward, you get that divergence in seasons 2 and 3. So I find seasons 2 and 3 very satisfying in the kind of like, thinking, chewing over what message is this sending. There are a lot of questions that are raised and maybe unsatisfactorily addressed, but the kind of sensational quality dissipates a little bit. So yeah.
And when you say multi-directional, I think you're referring to the fact that we get to actually meet some villains this time around, and we get more facets of this story in that way, right? Well,
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk about like one new interesting feature in the last couple seasons, which is this vote that takes place after every game, because the surviving players, they get to decide whether they want to continue to play for more prize money, or they could go home safely with with a smaller sum. So let's take a listen to one of those scenes.
192번.
선생님, 이제 그만하면 안 되겠습니까? 이 노인네가 이렇게 부탁드리겠습니다.
Okay, so that's from the third season of Squid Game, and what we heard there was one player begging the others to vote to go home. Nicholas, these votes, they were key scenes in this show. What do you think they added to the storytelling in those moments?
Yeah, so it continues the sort of motif that you laid down about expanding and making the critique sort of multi-directional. So the first season primarily targets the critique on the structure, right? The facilitators of the game, the cruelty of the system. But one aspect that the show seemed to be more interested in these 2 seasons, because I guess they're one whole season that's split into 2 somewhat arbitrarily, I would say, is the idea that the people on which the system is imposed upon are also participants and perpetuators of that system. And so it ends up being this case where there are enough people within the game that will always take the gamble of like, we believe that we can be the lucky ones. We can be the winners of the system, which it's supposed to replicate the feelings that a lot of people have in a capitalist system instead of all of us banding together and overthrowing this very unfair system. Though, I really do have a kind of a fascination with this choice, but also a deep, again, dissatisfaction with the way it chooses to render the people who vote to continue the game, because there is a deep, deep archetypal quality to the way that the show sketches out these characters. They're barely characters, mostly symbols. And the people who choose to perpetuate these games, they tend to be pretty one-dimensional. Let's put it that way. They're not given as much humanity as the people who are convinced to vote against. And so it is this tension that like the show like tries to extend into. Again, I think Michelle would say satisfactorily. I differ, but really, like I think I do find the choice quite fascinating.
It's interesting because I think I agreed with what you're saying. Even in the first season, when you met the villains, the mass elite and stuff, I just felt like I wasn't implicated in that because they felt like such, like you say, one-dimensional tropes and such. And Michelle, I mean, I would love for you to talk about these voting scenes in the context of the political context of South Korea. So, I mean, yeah, talk to me.
Yeah. So yes, I agree that these voting scenes, they add this additional dimension. They can be a little tedious, and that's
Hmm.
something that comes up in a lot of criticisms. But I really think that what Huang, the show creator, was trying to do was pick up on something that was really timely in the Korean context. The voting is showing how there are these like pressure points in South Korean society on how authentic is its status as a democracy. Like democracy there is pretty short, pretty young, and so there are a lot of concerns about its fragility. If you have democratic processes like voting, but choices that are, you know, unjust, undemocratic, does that still qualify? Does that still kind of alleviate a concern about whether or not you're living in an actual democracy? In South Korea, we saw how fragile that democracy is in December when former President Yoon Suk-yeol tried to declare martial law. That was a big shock. But so there are all these, questions about, especially how South Korea has really wedded democracy and capitalism together, like they are inextricable systems. And so I think this show is really trying to challenge that link as though they are one and the same, by showing that, at its core, this system is being challenged and breaking apart all over the world geopolitically, right? Like this idea that capitalism is by definition just and fair, the way that we like to think democracy is and democratic values are.
You're kind of making me appreciate this more when you say that. Oh, well, I mean, I want to add, explore another aspect of when you were again talking about kind of the multi-directional aspect of this season, because one of the big changes from season one in the next two seasons is that we actually do meet some of the masked Squid Game workers, right? Like they're kind of unmasked in this season. They're no longer just like these faceless villains. What did you think the show achieved by helping us get to know some of them better?
Totally. I mean, it's crucial actually to expanding this critique that's pretty, binary in the first season of like the players, victims against the game, which includes everyone involved, the workers, the elites, the VIPs, and the, game designers. In this in seasons 2 and 3, we see that the masked workers are just as exploited.
Mm.
So they are part of the system, but they are not, it's not just, two sides. And so they are producing the like commodity in the game, which is the spectacle of death, but they are kind of coerced into that as well.
Okay. Well, listen, now I want to shift this over to Nicholas in terms of your profoundly deep dissatisfaction with this series, because I feel like, the spoilers that this season has, that it packs, especially in its conclusion, are part of that dissatisfaction. So, there's two final reveals. One is who wins the Squid Game, but the second is a coda at the end of the final episode. So, Nicholas, you weren't fans of these surprise twists. Talk to me about why.
Oh, are we disclosing the substances of these twists?
Go ham.
No. Okay, great. So it should come to nobody's surprise that nothing ever ends well in this universe. So ultimately, I mean, there is a situation in which a pregnant contestant gives birth to a baby, and Gi-hun, who we've been following as the protagonist, the sort of really tortured protagonist throughout the entire story, opts to sacrifice himself to, let the baby win, I guess. In so doing, like, provides a symbol of humanity and like, what I suppose it is a response to the cavernous traps of capitalism. So in that choice, right, like there is an answer or at least a non-answer that's proffered by the series, which is that you can't really beat the system, or like the system is almost impossible to beat. Like you try and maybe you roll the dice with the next generation that may or may not be able to do the same thing, or if you really think about it, make the same choice at the end of their cycle. Like there is a very dour, very upsetting, cynical ending to the show, which again is contiguous with what the show is. But when you kind of take a couple of steps back and you think about the limits of quote unquote political art, which this is what it's supposed to be, I think we're ramping up against like the end times for this particular mode of critique, which is you can illustrate the issue, you can illustrate the cavernous nature and the inescapable nature of capitalism. But there's a reason why Squid Game was originally written as a movie that became a really great one season, not unlike the way that, Bong Joon-ho's Snowpiercer functions really well as a critique of capitalism, which is to say it provides a symbolic answer. It's Snowpiercer, spoiler, they blow up the entire train. And with Squid Game, it ends with this like we may or may not be able to do this. But when you try to answer the question, you gotta have a theory. And Squid Game ultimately does not want to provide a path forward, or is unable to provide a path forward. And when you take even more steps back, the reason for this probably is because Netflix, its capitalist overlord, really wants this property to continue. So there's a way in which both the text and the meta text of the show stabs itself in the foot. And I can't do anything but ask, why should I be giving time to this?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, because Netflix will absolutely vote to keep the games going, like the like
1
the
million
carry.
percent. There is no vote. You know?
Yeah. Well, Michelle, I mean, I want to ask you how you felt about. I mean, Nicholas, he said the spoiler out loud. A baby wins Squid Game. Tell me, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's in a lot of ways that twist. It's kind of bringing Squid Game into the fold of a lot of dystopian narratives that we may be familiar with. So it's like a way that it's linking its politics, maybe, or its worldview to others that we may be familiar with. Children of Men came to mind when I was watching that. But it's really interesting because I find that the answer that is given. I mean, we may or may not like its sort of sentimentality and perhaps its uh, kind of minor effects in addressing such a kind of monolithic problem, is just small acts of surprising kindness in which you don't just act like the machine that the system wants you to be, and you actually do something that might be self-sacrificing, not always acting in self-interest the way that the system assumes that humans will, just because of the way that the game is set up and the values that have that are put forward by this capitalist ideology. And so, yeah, that might be a kind of pat answer to what we can do. What is the way that we face this predicament that we're in? But I think actually a lot of the K content that takes up this problem is kind of speaking in one voice and saying, yes, let's just try to not treat each other like our value is only determined by our net worth or something like that, and do things that are maybe a little surprising. Use our free will as human beings, not to just act like these automatons or machines that we're programmed to.
I love how you find the glass half full in all the deep and profoundly dissatisfied. Nicholas, I mean, only a minute left, but I just wanted to ask you, what do you think Squid Games, how do you think that the phenomenon that it is has changed the TV landscape, but also just pop culture at large?
Yeah, on the first part, like, it deepened Netflix's international presence, right? Like it was already, Netflix had already been sort of building out a pretty robust international operation by the point that at which Squid Game became a phenomenon. But it really rooted Netflix's global standing, and now there are probably even dreams of opening up an amusement park that's Netflix themed. And if that happens, you can bet for sure there's gonna be a Squid Game land or something. There's already a Squid Game reality TV show, which I think is actually pretty good. How it changed pop culture? Again, I've got to give you, in as much the same way that Squid Game provides a very cynical and dour answer, Squid Game provided a wonderful capitalist metaphor, and it also provided the means by which it becomes co-opted by the system. And I feel like it's a thing that most viewers can even sort of feel for themselves when they look at Squid Game branded goods and the reality television show. So it proffered the critique and it neutered itself at a very high level, and it's very hard to walk away from any of it feeling good about anybody involved.
Well, the funny thing is, even in your deep, profound dissatisfaction, you somehow made me appreciate the show more, both of you. So thank you both for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Good morning.
So Michelle Cho is a professor with the Department of East Asian Studies at the University of Toronto. Nicholas Quah is a culture critic at Vulture. He lives in Vancouver. All 3 seasons of Squid Game are streaming now on Netflix. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. So look, the reviews for Pixar's new kids movie, Elio, have been pretty decent. But it's been this huge flop at the box office, and it's not alone, because a lot of original kids films have been struggling to find an audience in theaters lately. So Teri Hart is here to help me figure out why. Teri, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Great.
Look,
Happy.
so look, let's talk about Elio. Look, I kind of like this movie, okay? And even my daughter came out of it. She was like, she liked it. She was like, you know what? That's a lot better than I expected. But we're not here to review Elio, but I do want to know, what did you think of the movie?
I liked it. I do think it plays a little bit older. I think your daughter Penelope's probably at the right age for it. I was sitting next to like a 4 or 5 year old, and she said at one of the scary parts, "I do not want to watch this movie anymore." So it is rated PG for a good reason. There are some pretty dark moments in it. I think it's a little bit confusing. I think there's one or two too many plot points, which we've come to associate with Pixar. I think that they need to have a postmortem about how much they want to put into every single movie. And in terms of like callbacks, grandparents will recognize some really obvious E.T. and other sci-fi movies that they grew up in that are sprinkled through Elio. But yeah, Elio is a good movie. There's no two ways about it.
Okay, so then, I mean, let's talk about the bigger picture then, and kind of the systemic reasons for why it was such a huge flop. Like, what do you think the factors are? Like, what was stacked against this movie and other original kids' films?
Well, let's talk about what your daughter said. Well, that was much better than I thought it was going to be. And I think we can trace that right back to the trailer. I think the trailer seemed overstuffed. The trailer didn't know what the movie was. The movie itself doesn't have any recognizable voices to it. The most recognizable would be Zoe Saldana. And I don't think a lot of parents, let alone kids, are having any emotional connection to Zoe Saldana's voice. And I'd also say that, that trailer did kind of wink to the fact that the movie has some quite dark points. And the palette of the movie is quite dark. Like, this is not Inside Out or Inside Out 2, right? And I think that we saw that. And, as you said, Rad, like, this is a completely original story. It's not based on a book or a sequel or a video game. And nobody knows this world of Elio and the communiverse that Elio goes. So we're asking a lot of parents and children in terms of this new world.
Okay, see, here's the thing though. Like, when you're talking about like, this is not an original, this is an original Pixar script. It's not based on a book or a Broadway musical or any other kind of previous IP. It's interesting because, 8 years ago, Coco is an original movie, Pixar IP that makes $800 million at the box office. And yet here it's Elio that's $20 million on its opening weekend. So what do you think? What is that? What changed in the time since?
What changed? Coco was 2017. And you know what happens on November 2019? Disney Plus launches. Disney Plus becomes part of kids' lives. And I think we are seeing the impact of that on kids and their viewing habits now. And it's actually the perfect case study because kids who are 10 years old now were 4 years old when 2019, when Disney Plus launched. So that's the perfect age to just be able to access that content at their fingertips at any time. And I think that that's what we're seeing. And kids are being more and more familiar with these characters and these storylines that they're watching over and over again and pausing for dinner or bath time. They watch movies in a very different way than I think any other generation of kids has. So I'm just not so sure that the big screen is going to be for discovery anymore. I think people might discover things on Disney Plus and then get sequels or reboots as a theatrical release.
Okay, look, I find this all so depressing. But Teri, let me just end it on a good note. Like 30 seconds left. I do want, the kids are out of school, parents have a lot of time with them. What is an original kids movie that you would recommend people check out with the time off?
So one that I think people will really enjoy, and it plays a little bit younger, is a movie called Butterfly Tale. It's about monarchs and their migration patterns south, and it's beautiful and lovely, and I just found it very, very charming. And monarch butterflies are incredible. I learned a ton also. But most importantly, what people need to go to, and it's free, is the NFB app. The NFB app is incredible. It's completely free. It has swim lanes. designs, curated content for younger kids, for teenagers. It's got all those Oscar-nominated shorts that we hear about every year in this country. Remember, not all animation is for kids, though, so check the rating. But the NFB app, I cannot tell you what an incredible resource that is for every single Canadian. Check it out, download it, and watch it.
This is not what I expected you to say, but that's why I love you. And Teri, I got to let you go. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Rad.
Teri Hart is an entertainment reporter and a regular here on Commotion. I'm Rad Simonpillai. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.